Happy Sunday morning to everyone. This show is coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves on the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy a break for some uplifting conversations. This morning, my guest is Beth Hoffman, and her new book is Bet the Farm, The Dollars and Cents of Growing Food in America, published by Island Press in 2021. Beth is a beginning farmer on a 530-acre Whippoorwill Creek farm in Iowa. For the last 20 years, she has worked as a journalist covering food and agriculture. Her work has been aired and published on NPR's Morning Edition, The Guardian, The Salt, Latino USA, and NewsHour. Hi, Beth. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Well, do you have your morning cup of coffee this morning?
I have some water, actually. I've had a few glasses of caffeinated things, so I'm taking a break.
That's okay. Yeah. We all need a little caffeine break, too.
Exactly.
So, Beth, let's start with, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your academic background?
I grew up on the East Coast, outside of New York City, and I then went to college at Emory in Atlanta. I moved to the Rockies, and then ended up later in life as one of those older graduate students at UC Berkeley's School of Journalism. So I became a journalist, and I lived in the Bay Area for about 12 years doing freelance journalism. I had already been doing journalism about food and agriculture before I went to grad school as well. But I focused on that after, and then I taught at the University of San Francisco in the Media Studies department for 6 years full time.
Oh, wow. Well, tell us, now you were a journalist, and what was your motivation for writing this book?
Well, like I said, I had been doing journalism about food and agriculture for about 25 years. And I met my husband in Berkeley. And within about the first 5 minutes of meeting him, he told me how he had just visited his family's farm in Iowa, and he was going to move back there when his kids were grown. So I probably said something, profound at the moment, like Iowa. I never really had thought about Iowa or living in Iowa or anything about Iowa particularly. And so I knew that was, on the table as soon as I met him, but we moved along in our relationship and fell in love, and the kids grew, and finally we're out of school, and we moved to Iowa to take over his family's farm. And, when we moved, I knew there would be a lot of journalism to do, actually doing farming as opposed to just kind of talking about it. I knew I was going to learn a ton, but I didn't realize how many actual complete surprises that I would be looking at as we went through this journey, and how much I would really learn that I really had no idea about as just a journalist. And a lot of that came back to the economics of farming, where I just started learning more and more about how little farmers make and why farmers make as little as they do. And so that was the impetus for the book. I knew that there was enough information, if I didn't know it, that most people then didn't know it, because I had already been looking into this for so long. So I knew that there was a book in our journey.
Yes, that was most interesting and that's true for some of us. We imagine somebody else's job is, we see the highlights of it and not the hard work part of it. Mm-hmm. So I guess my first question is, how much debt are these farmers carrying, and why?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that when you think about commodity agriculture, so people who are growing corn or soybeans or wheat or rice, for the larger market, their products are not individually sold like as their farm's products. It goes into a huge silo or a huge grain bin and is sold as a commodity. It's such a small margin that people are making off of each bushel of corn, let's say, or even each head of cattle when you're dealing with that kind of market, that you really have to be maximizing all that you're doing. And so efficiency and yields becomes this very important thing. And to do that, you need the latest, greatest technology and equipment so that you can be so-called competing with all of your neighbors to have the highest yields. And so there's a lot of expense in doing that. There's expense of land because you have to have large swaths of land in order to do this kind of agriculture. You need to have equipment, the largest and maybe most quickly moving equipment, the seeds and the chemicals, they're all very expensive. This year in particular, fertilizer is just, for 2022's season, is just astronomically expensive. So the debt burden becomes huge, and people are on what many people have called the agricultural treadmill, where you just make enough money to pay off those debts, to buy something else, to grow enough, to make a small profit, to pay off your debts, and the cycle continues over and over. There's a group that did a study in Nebraska that found that the average farm carried a debt somewhere around $1.5 million. So you're talking about, people who live in cities now have that kind of debt for an apartment or something like that. But it's equivalent out in rural America, where people have ginormous expenses in carrying this debt, and not a lot of ways, though, to make money to pay it off in a real timely manner. So the debt never particularly goes away. It's not like you pay it off and then have a profit that a farm is making. It's a hamster wheel.
What kind of, you were saying that I was really surprised at your first statement book. How much profit, I don't know what an average farm size is, but what would an average farm profit be for a year?
Well, that completely depends on the market. So what's interesting is that the costs of production stay pretty relatively the same. They certainly never go down. They go up. So your cost of doing business each year is pretty consistent or on an upward swing. But what you're going to make off of that is often very low or below what your production is. It can drop below. So there's farmers turn more and more to things like contracting, like having a contract for your corn or for your cattle as you're raising it or before you're raising it. That's how hog confinement works, is that's all guaranteed to go to a particular company and for a particular price. So at least you know what your profit margins would be, but they're extremely small. Even if you're selling local foods directly to customers, your profit margin is quite small compared to the costs of doing everything. Because, don't forget, like even if you have a local farm that you purchase from, that land is likely quite expensive where they're doing the farming. So the margins are very small, smaller than in most other kinds of industries. Even in like the restaurant industry, you're trying to have your costs be somewhere, your food costs be like 30% of what you're making. So you try and have like a 30% profit margin, but in farming that rarely happens, that you would make that much of a profit. But it's variable year to year, because there might be less corn grown this year. There might be too much corn grown this year. And so the market is very fluid.
Well, that was interesting. I noticed at the beginning of your book, you talked about that part of the reason it's keeping farmers in this cycle too is the narratives that they tell themselves. And could you talk a little bit more about that? What are the two narratives? Are they saints or not?
Yeah, I talk about in the book two myths, and I talk about it throughout the book. So this is a very, very brief synopsis of a much more complex thing. But the first myth is this idea that bigger is better, and that farms need to be always at the peak of their efficiency and generating as much as they possibly can. Like I said, to eke out any tiny profit margin. So it's like if you think about, you have any kind of industry, you're making shirts. If your profit margin is just a few cents on each shirt, then you need to have thousands or millions of shirts in order to make any kind of profit. And that's the same concept with commodity agriculture, that people have thought that you have to have this higher and higher efficiency. So that's the first myth, is what I call the bigger is better myth. And the problems with it is that as farmers get better and better in technologies and they grow more and more, by definition, then the supply keeps rising, and often the demand is not rising at an equal algorithm. So you end up with oversupply problems really pretty much every time. If you look at historical rates of sales and booms in agriculture, there's always a bust that happens soon after because the market has driven up so much supply. And we're in that kind of situation now where ethanol was a big thing that everybody started getting very excited about. There was more and more and more corn grown for it. And then there's been a huge lull in the market for over a decade where farmers were barely making anything off of their crops. And now we're seeing a little bit of a spike again because there's some interest in ethanol again. So the bigger is better myth is problematic because it drives oversupply, and it drives huge, huge debt that farmers get into in order to have this efficiency. The other myth that I talk about in the book is an agricultural myth. So we have these mythologies around farming, about it being this simple life, about getting our hands in the dirt, about growing nutritious food for our communities and stewarding the land, saving the planet. And if you think about it, these are extremely large things for farmers to take on, the responsibility of nourishing their communities and of saving the planet from climate disaster. This is it's really enormous kind of responsibility to be shouldering. So this myth gets very tricky in that a lot of farmers, the people who are doing sustainable farming, often feel like they have to work themselves into the ground and that they shouldn't really be compensated. They shouldn't really be asking for too much for their products because that would be selfish. That's, not going along with that agrarian myth. So it creates a lot of burnout. And what you see in sustainable agriculture and people who do organics or trying to direct sales to customers in a local food system, you see those farmers become very burnt out very quickly. And it just becomes not a sustainable kind of an industry in and of itself. So that's a myth that I think really needs to be looked at and questioned, because if we can't have the people doing things sustainably be sustainable, then that is not going to make change for the long haul for all of us.
Yeah, and you were talking about in your book, you told your father-in-law that you wanted to be organic, and he was like, pull weeds again?
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's So yeah, what you're referring to is a scene where, I said to my father-in-law, who was the farmer in charge of the land, when we started talking about coming back to Iowa, and he said, well, what kinds of things do you want to do? And I said, I'm not sure, something organic. And he, yes, had that reaction of just like, are you kidding me? Do you really want to be pulling weeds every day of your life? And that's what organics is. And he's not wrong about that. That the reason why when you go to the supermarket, organic foods is so expensive is, generally speaking, because the labor is it's far more labor than it is to grow conventionally with chemicals. So the chemicals are there for a reason. We have to remember that if we want to actually solve the problem of chemicals being put onto the land. The chemicals serve a purpose, and that they keep the weeds down, and it makes it so that the labor is not so extraordinary. And it's a problem in sustainable food circles and in organics that you have to do it a lot of times by hand or with small machinery, and that costs extra money. So the food has to be more expensive, and a lot of the farmers are not willing to make it as expensive as it probably needs to be.
Yes. And when I heard him say that, growing up, I lived in a rural area, and we had a farm. We had a garden.
Yeah.
Barely,
where did you live?
in a panhandle here near Niceville, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And we had rabbits, and we took rabbit doodles, and that was our kid chore. We put it in the garden, and we, of course, compared to ours very small garden. But yeah, the weeds then about August would overtake everything. And, we always enjoyed the food coming out of there. But when I was reading your book, I thought, yeah, we really have no idea how hard it is to just even do a garden.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a blog post on our blog for the farm recently that was about growing carrots. I mean, it's hard to grow carrots. It's not an easy thing. And to make them all perfect and look the same. And, granted, a lot of those varieties are selected and are grown because they look good. They don't necessarily taste good or are as nutritious. But to grow something that has fields of identical things that grow in a very systematic way, that you can harvest in a very systematic way, is a bit of incredible science. And we have to give it, we have to actually acknowledge that, and acknowledge the fact that it does save time. And because farming is such there's not huge profit margins made, it means that people can then go get other jobs to support their farm if they spend less time laboring at their farm. So the system is a system that many people say is broken. I would not say it's a broken system, because I think it's a little bit of a miracle that you walk into a supermarket in rural America, somewhere quite remote, like where we live, and there's a banana sitting there. I mean, to most of the public, that's just a pure miracle. They don't even think about it at all, probably because it's so commonplace. But if you do think about it, it's a bit of a miracle. The problem is that the impact of that has been so dramatic that the people who are then picking bananas and the environments that they're grown, all of that has suffered as a result. But I think that we have to take into account what the actual reasons are why it developed this way, in order to come up with solutions that actually will have some lasting change.
Wow. Yes, that's a very good point. I'm vegetarian, actually. I have been for a long time, and I try to and I know why it costs more to have the organic. But on the same flip side, at least I grew up in a rural area, and I do understand it. It's like even my parents' neighbor right now, he's He's putting the time in. He wants his own organic food, and he's doing what he can. But boy, he puts a lot of time into it.
Yeah, exactly. It's so much time, and I think we all have to make choices. We have to make choices about what we're going to spend our money on. We're going to make choices about, how much information we can take in about any one thing, right? There's so many things that are wrong going on in the world right now. How much can we pack in, and how much education can we get about each individual thing? It's pretty enormous. But again, like if we were addressing the problem of labor and costs and processing issues, those are different than just saying there should be no hog facilities, or nobody should use any chemicals. I think those are movements that then end up very short-sighted, because there's going to be another thing to take the place of what was just outlawed, right? Because the problem remains the same.
Well, let me ask you, and I think that this is a myth too that some of us really don't understand. Is you talked about farm subsidies in your book? Can you explain more about farm subsidies? How did that work? What happened when you went to go find out about that?
Yeah, well, farm subsidies, there's a lot of people who are far more knowledgeable, so I would refer to many of them for more specific information. But we're in a tricky situation as a country that you want to ensure food security for your population, and you want to also secure that farmers can continue to farm even if things go wrong. So even if you have a massive drought, even if the market crashes, we can't afford to lose all of the farmers. So that's sort of where subsidies come out, because they were invented to try and have some consistency of income and some guarantee, so that you weren't going to always end up possibly destitute in every farming season. But the problem is that they've grown so convoluted, and they also have the huge problem in that, like most places now, I guess a lot of places you could say there's the same thing, is that they are so badly understaffed, and people do not have the time at those agencies to come out and actually help people make real change on their farm, to understand the environment that they're working within, to make recommendations and give advice. What those USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture employees do mostly is check boxes and have to fill out huge forms and ranking systems and learn new computer programs. And the Farm Bill changes every 5 years. So all of those programs change it's a very, very bureaucratic situation. And to me, there's this really great system that's actually set up, where we have a USDA department, and in many cases like a state university extension office in every single county, all 99 counties in Iowa, and many agricultural states, I think, are all set up the same. So you have this great ability, this great infrastructure set up already that could be used to disseminate a lot of knowledge. And instead, we're just sort of perpetuating and tweaking and retweaking the same programs. And now with all this new agriculture money that Biden is proposing, there's now even more programs at the same number or even less employees because of COVID. And even they're trying to now deal with even more bureaucracy. And so that to me is a system that really needs some overhauling and some rethinking entirely.
Oh, yes, that's interesting. It sounds like it was quite something to navigate. And I've noticed that in South Florida, I was living in Key Largo, right there by Miami, and all the land was just getting sold out from agriculture to housing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, where do we go? What are we all going to eat?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I think it's, and just to make your point, just to step back to your last question a little bit, like in the book, I outline all of these things about our own personal experience. So it's our experience walking into the USDA office and exactly what we encountered. And I take people through it that way. So it's sort of not a lecture about subsidies as much as this personal story. Yes, but we are losing farmland in in areas like that where you have either tourism or cities developing, that are sprawling further and further out. But we also have this phenomenon currently where, because the stock market and other sorts of investments are seen as I'm losing my words, are seen as so variable, that land is something that's currently being seen as a very stable sort of investment and asset class. And so there's, again, this huge land rush that's happening, and the cost, there was some acreage sold in Iowa, northern Iowa, that went for something like $26,000 an acre, which is just extraordinary. I mean, that's like San Francisco Bay Area kind of property levels. And it's the kind of money that you would never make back growing a commodity on it, what you would owe if you had to take out a mortgage on it. But it's the Bill Gateses of the world. He's now, I guess, somebody has said he's the largest landholder in the U.S. now. Those very large investments are for very wealthy people, kind of stockpiling a lot of agricultural land. So it's an interesting trend. I'm not really clear on how or why, or what will become of all of that, but it's an interesting trend nonetheless.
When you said that, a thought popped into my head, and I have read that too. And I thought, I don't see Bill Gates getting down pulling weeds.
No, I don't think, it's purely for investment, although I have heard a few of the people who are purchasing these lands kind of see it as like they're going to do some sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture kinds of systems. Even if you were going to do that, the fact remains is that it becomes sort of like a kingdom, right? So even if you're doing great practices on it, is that what we want in the U.S. is to have these ginormous landholders that are then having workers do the regenerative agriculture? To me, it makes a lot more sense to have individual families and people living on land taking care of land. I think that's part of what we dream of as part of the American dream. But if we want it to be like that, we have to then create that. It's not just going to be that.
Well, I like in your book too, and you talked about farmers of color, indigenous people, etc. You don't really shy away from the hard questions, and the fact that you had in here, mostly family farms are in white hands for generations. How can farmland? What was your experience of that? Can it be more diversified to support, everyone, etc.? Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So 96% of land in the U.S. is held by white families. And, people talk about the sort of family farm as if it's something quaint and unique. But again, like 98% of farms are considered family farms. They're owned ultimately by families. There's not a lot of what people think is like corporate farming. Like a Tyson doesn't actually own very much land comparatively. They're not controlling the land and raising the animals. That's too much risk. So they leave all of that risk in the hands of the actual farmers to take out the debt to have, whatever kind of confinement facility or animals or carrots, and then they just purchase them at the other end, and for the processing. So yes, a lot of what I talk about in the book is that our ability to be on this land in the first place is because of our privilege, because of the privilege of having this land stayed in the family for 5 generations to get to my husband, John, in part because they were white people who could access different kinds of programs and were allowed to purchase land when his great-great-grandfather did in 1851. At that point in time, the indigenous tribes in this region, the Meskwaki, had signed treaties to leave. They actually didn't leave, which is a very interesting story I would encourage people to read about. But there was also laws at the time in 1851 against blacks even being in the state, actually, not even owning land. But if a freed slave or mulatto came into the state of Iowa, they needed to leave within 3 days. So all of this is just to say that the system has very much been set up in a way that benefited people like our family. And going forward, that has to be addressed more and more. There's a lot of groups doing great work out there about that and trying to think about ways to make more land accessible. But I think it's something, there's been some interesting comments like on Amazon about my book where people have said, this is a book about farming. Why is she talking about skin color? Or, why are we talking about racism? And this is about agriculture. And we have to understand, like, this is how it worked. This is how you have systemic issues is because it's baked into things like agriculture or banking or whatever the kind of industry. So going forward, I think we all have to think about how to bring more people onto the land and to use the lead of a lot of groups. Like there's a wonderful movement called the Land Back Movement, which is being driven by tribal members who, there's indigenous folks who are encouraging people to just give back the land to the tribe where the land was taken in the first place. So there's a lot of interesting things out there, and I talk about a few of them in the book, but I hope that changes.
Well, here you have an opportunity to address your Amazon reviews.
Yes, exactly. Hey, reviewer. No, I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the people even said, like, I admit I'm very uncomfortable with these issues. And, I tried to really phrase it in a way that's it's not political. It's just saying, here is the experience of this family in this place. You can't really dispute the fact that in 1851, these other things were going on when the great-great-grandfather purchased the land. That's how it is. That's how it was. So let's talk about that. And, yes, it's uncomfortable. That's okay.
That's okay. Yes, I agree. We just have to talk so we can all, everybody has to eat.
Yep.
I'd like to, in your book, you had a chapter about self-care. And I think it was kind of back to the narrative question about farmers. Are they saints? Are they chemical evil villains? And about taking care of yourself. How did you realize, what moment happened that you goes, I really have to take care of myself too?
Yeah. Well, it was a very stressful time moving out here. We didn't really have a place to live. We were living in a tiny house, which was basically a shed in the backyard of John's dad's house, and no running water. And it was quaint and it was romantic, but it was also extremely stressful to write a book and, have it be icy and gray outside um, and just have so many things to do. And it's just, we're all in this kind of a phase in society, I think, especially pre-pandemic, where our lives were defined by just being busy. You talk to anybody and it's, oh, I'm so busy. But on a farm, it's like there's living things that are dependent upon you. And you also have these visions of being so much more than you see the farm right here today. So it's extremely easy to get wrapped up. I don't know who that was. That was strange. So it's extremely easy to just get wrapped up in all of these different kinds of things, the to-do lists, and have it just endlessly run. And I started, like many people, I think, during the pandemic and the political chaos and racial reckoning, which is a phrase somebody didn't like in my book as well. And all of that, there was a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. And I just remember one day sitting at my computer and actually recognizing that I was having pains in my chest and thinking to myself, this isn't healthy. This is not good. This is anxiety, and it's, maybe it's a panic attack, but whatever it is it's something I don't want to do with much frequency. And so, I went down a whole road and thinking about self-care and really thinking about how that is saying no to a lot of extra things, that getting involved with too many things at once is just, it's a recipe for disaster. And trying to embody the mythology of the farmer who does everything and has this wonderful diversified farm with 50 different animals and crops and providing local everything to their neighbors and keeping them nourished. And it's just, it's a way to end up with a heart attack. So I didn't want to do that.
What did you do?
I actually got some coaching from a woman named Charlotte Smith. She runs a business called 3 Cow Marketing. She has a podcast that's very helpful and addresses a lot of these issues. I did some of that with her, but her system was a little bit too rigorous for me. I couldn't quite, it made me feel guilty about not doing what I was supposed to be doing. But it was really, I think, cutting back and just realizing that there was limited time in a day. At the end of the day, at my end of my life, I'm probably not going to have changed everything. So what small changes can I make and stay sane? And trying to really time manage in a whole different way. And that was something that I've found. Oh, and meditation, I have to say. If people who don't meditate, you might think it's a lot of hoopla and people talking a lot about it, but it trains your body how not to be in a state of overdrive all the time. And it's like going for a walk every day or getting some kind of exercise. It's training. It's just training your body to think about how not to stress. And it works very well.
It's just calming the mind.
It's calming the mind, but I think it's not just for the moment that you're doing it. It's like actually giving your body some kind of muscle memory of how to do that. And when you get wrapped up, it changes your body chemistry to have meditated every day and be thinking about, oh, this is how the body can actually run without going all, brainy, crazy on yourself.
All the time. Yes, yeah. I understand. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, so what would you like for people to take away from your book?
Well, I think for me, some of the important things is just I really wanted to write a book that was fair to people. I don't like the current language of the world where we're all sort of against people, and we're in battles and have a lot of conflict. I like to think about it as a lot of us being much closer on a spectrum than we think. And so I think really I wanted to humanize what is happening in agriculture and take it out of this kind of abstract conversation about, quote unquote, big ag or big meat or whatever the big thing stands for. I think it's not helpful to categorize in that way. So I wanted to have people think, oh, okay, as a farmer, like, yeah, I can see how people, use Roundup and get GMO seeds. It's not because they're evil. It's not because they're minions of big business or have been brainwashed, or it's because in a lot of ways those things make sense, and we have to understand that in order to change any of that. So that for me was really one of the real underlying key things, is that I want to stimulate conversation and have us just kind of think about things in a different way than chalking the other side up to doing evil. It's just not really, we all kind of want similar things. Our interests at the end of the day, I think, are more closely aligned than we think. And that was what I wanted to talk about and show in agriculture.
Oh, I have one other question for you. So you talked about co-farming a little bit and diversifying the land.
Mm-hmm.
And are you doing that now? And how are you doing it?
Well, so the idea of co-farming is something like co-housing, where you'd have ownership of maybe buildings. Well, in our case with co-farming, like maybe some machinery and have things that you're doing together, but then each individually do your own thing. So the idea is that we are looking for people who would like to have their own enterprises on the land simultaneous with our production systems. So, for example, it would make great sense to have people doing poultry on the farm, because then they could follow the cattle, and the cattle manure gets flies, and the poultry eats the larva, and that's a great system. It's a lot of work for one person, but for different people that would work. And then we could do sales together, or we could do it separately. We could work some of that out. We have not found people to do it because, in large part, we live in a really rural place, and there is not much housing, for one. And it's not an area of the state that's well known for its food or things that are going on, interesting about food. There are areas of Iowa where that is happening, and there are a lot more young farmers. So we are always looking for those people to join us, but we're also kind of decided that we need to maybe take a step back, and something that we really can impact is the culture around food here. So we're looking into having a commercial kitchen, maybe a small restaurant and shop, and trying to just sort of work on changing that the environment, so that in order to attract people, there has to be attractive things that are happening, I think. So we are starting at that level currently, and hopefully we'll grow from there.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my last question. Beth, I want to thank you so much for being here today. It's been a pleasure having you. And I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but I'd like for you to tell the listeners, what is your next project?
I'm in a little bit of a phase of like, what do I want to be when I grow up again at 53, And I guess the older you get, the more you realize that that can constantly happen throughout your life. And it's good because you get to kind of reassess. So I'm in a little bit of a mode of not quite knowing what the next project will be. I think it will be along those lines that I was just saying. We're going to have this kitchen and teach classes. I'd like to do a lot more teaching, mentoring, learning from other people. And I love that environment of teaching. So we'll probably do writing classes in addition to cooking classes and butchery, all of that kind of stuff in our facility here on the farm. We should have that, we hope, by next summer. So it's quick, but we're trying to tackle a lot of things here because I don't know if everybody feels this way in their 50s, but I certainly do, where I feel like, all right, we got to get moving. There's not a lot, there's not maybe a lot of very viable work time left. And so that's the way that we're headed right now.
Well, I do love your picture, your profile in your book. It's you jumping up into the air.
I like that too. I was very happy they let me use that, but I don't really like that little small picture of your face looking serious,
No, you're out there on the farm in the lake. It's like, yay, I'm here.
Exactly. We're only going to do this once. You better have fun doing it.
That's right. Well, again, I want to let our audience know that the book is Bet the Farm: The Dollars and Cents of Growing Food in America, published by Island Press in 2021. And Beth Hoffman, thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you so much. And for the audience, I'll see you next on Sunday Morning Coffee. Thank you so much.